Hey there everybody, Paler here, and welcome back. Today, it's time for final thoughts on Dark Souls 2. I held off on doing this until I had the PC version just to see if we had any major changes worth taking note of. And at this point, I can pretty much summarize that no, there are no major changes between the PC version and the PS3 version at least. It does definitely run better and everything, but we'll get in all that in due time. So I'm also trying a new format here on the final thoughts. I'm really going to try to shorten these down, keep them to about 15 minutes in length. I tend to go into way more detail than I have to in my reviews. I cover stuff that I should be covering in a walkthrough or something. So I'm going to try to eliminate that. So those of you that watch my channel might have actually noticed this will be the second review going up. The other one's going to sneakily disappear, and this one will replace it. But yeah. So Dark Souls 2, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Where do I really stand on it? Overall, Dark Souls 2 is a terrific game. It really stands out among the current generation for the type of game that you're looking for in the Dark Souls series. I don't know what you would call it. Is it an action-adventure game? An adventure slash horror? I don't know what type of genre you'd put that into, but there's definitely you know what you're getting yourself into when you walk into Dark Souls. You're getting yourself into a mechanically challenging and very specific type of game where every action has a direct cause and reaction that is very tangible. And for that, I very much appreciate where it is. Now, on its own merits, Dark Souls 2 is a terrific game. Where the water gets a little muddy is when you start to compare it to Demon Souls and the original Dark Souls, which I believe we kind of have to. Dark Souls 1, at least, it's only a few years old now. What is it, about 4 years old? So it's still relative enough. The PC version's been out for only about 2 years, and it's still going very, very strong. So we can't just ignore Dark Souls 1 when we look at Dark Souls 2. And the way I kind of am breaking it down, I look at Dark Souls 1 as the top 4-star, 5-star steakhouse that you go to. And while you're going to get most likely smaller portions of a steak, that steak is going to be unbelievably good. It's going to be top notch. What's the Nebraskan steaks that you want to get, or say a Kobe beef? It's going to just be this amazing steak. That was Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, is more of the 3-star steakhouse, where you're not getting that Kobe beef, but you're going to get a very good steak. You're going to get a larger cut of it, but it's going to be of a slightly lesser quality. And that is really where the two come apart. Dark Souls 1 had the really strong, the really focused dynamic, and everything came together just great. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't have problems. Dark Souls 1 definitely had problems, especially the PC side. But if we just look at the combat mechanics, the bosses that came together, the one piece of DLC that they released was just terrific. All of these things came together to make a very, very strong game. Dark Souls 2 loses a little bit of that, but expands in scope. And for that, it deserves recognition. And it's still, even despite some of the setbacks, it is still a very, very good game. And that's one of the things I'm going to keep reiterating. I'm going to be saying a lot of negative things about it, but even with all these, it is still a terrific game. Now, where does Dark Souls 2 succeed and where does it fail? Well, first of all, it succeeds in generally it opens up the difficulty level for brand new players. For people that are coming in from a different game, have never played a Dark Souls game, this is your best entry level into the franchise. It is still going to punish you, especially new players, until you learn the mechanics, until you learn to be patient and attack during open windows, until you learn to minimize or monitor your stamina, not to run yourself into negative stamina. It's going to punish you, but in a more reasonable manner than any of the previous games. It also has a terrific ability, unlike Dark Souls 1 or Demon Souls did, to allow you to really customize the difficulty of the game to your certain play style. Now, this does require a little bit of work, but for the people that want a tougher, more thorough experience, they can use Bonfire Ascetics, they can join a certain covenant, and then the New Game Plus mode adds in more than it did in previous entries. New Game Plus not only increases the strength and the attack and the defense of the enemies, it adds more enemies in, it changes where some enemies are, it changes the locations of certain items. It's more than just a New Game Plus. It brings a new element to the game. Of course, to get to New Game Plus, you do have to play through and beat the game itself one time through. So while it does offer the higher difficulty levels to those people that want it, they do have to work a little bit to get to those difficulty levels, which for some is going to be disappointing. Overall, though, I think it was a smart move for the franchise. I think it was a quality move for the franchise that will allow Dark Souls to gain a greater following than it already has. The key will be with the next iteration, because there's going to be another one. There's already possibly a Demon Souls 2 in the work, that they don't go too much further. If they simplify it too much further, if they remove too much more of the difficulty, they could lose the spirit or the soul of the game, and it'll just become another hack and slash game with little motivation to play it. So they got to walk that line. They got to be very careful. Dark Souls 2 also just brings about an altogether better co-op and PvP experience. The new servers work great. Being able to find friends to join up with is easier than ever. It's still not exactly streamlined. There's still a little bit of a work that needs to go into there between choosing different rings and everything to make it easy. But some of that is also the charm of Dark Souls. That you got to find your way through the world. It's not going to just say, hey, join a lobby and go play with your friends. That'll be a turnoff for some people, but I think this was also a smart move on their part to keep at least a little bit of Demon Souls and Dark Souls of that isolationism or that randomness to the multiplayer. I think that was a smart move, as that brings an extra element to the game. Other than that, though, a lot of the rest of the game is kind of the same. Where the game kind of falls apart, though, where it has some real problems, is in regards to its originality. Dark Souls 1 had a bunch of very interesting, unique bosses every time you came across it. Dark Souls 2 kind of, to me, feels like the development team wasn't quite ready to start working on Dark Souls 2, but they had to because that was their job. And a lot of those awesome, crazy bosses that we saw, a lot of the unique fights that we saw in the original game have been replaced with standard humanoid, normally large, with some type of very large two-handed weapon. That is easily close to half the bosses in the game. There's about 36 bosses in this game, including all the optional ones, and I think it's pretty fair to say, I haven't counted them all up, but about 15 of them are humanoid with large two-handed weapon. Some of them have shields, some of them carry maces, some of them carry swords, but it's humanoid with large two-handed weapon. And, well, that's not terrible. It's a letdown compared to what we'd experienced before. It's a letdown compared to Dark Souls 1. And that's disappointing. The environments are also a bit of a letdown. Now, there are some very interesting environments. Lost Bastille is a well-designed, intricate, well-woven environment. But most of the environments are very linear, very straightforward, and just not all that great. They're acceptable, they're passable, they're playable, but they don't have that certain something that Dark Souls 1 had, and to some extent Demon Souls. And it's a disappointment. The world now is more, I would say, Dark Souls 1 is a gnarled branch where every loops, or every branch kind of loops back around on itself. It's this fist right? And no matter what finger you're on that fist, if you follow that finger, you're going to run into another finger. You're going to get to the palm, which is going to lead you out. That's kind of the way Dark Souls 1 is. From the central Firelink Shrine, anything and everything loops out and back with a few exceptions. I mean, obviously, down where the Four Kings are, that's an exception. You finally make it out to Sith the Wolf, that's kind of an exception. But for the most part, everything is interconnected and looped. Dark Souls 2 is much more a wheel, where Majula is the center hub, and then you branch out from that wheel on the spokes in different ways, and you follow that path to the end. So you're going to go through anywhere from like 2 to 5 zones along that spoke, and then at the end, you're going to come to a finish point and go back. And the actual interconnection between these individual spokes is almost non-existent. The only way to go from like Forest of the Giants over to Hyde's Tower of Flame is back to Majula and then back over. Now, this is just an observation that you come through, and it does degrade from the world. It's not as big of a problem as it does seem, though, as you can teleport between bonfires right away. So as soon as you get to a new area and open it up, and you have that bonfire available, you can come and go from that zone in as quickly as your system can load a save file. So it's not all that bad, but it definitely does detract from the world. And that's, again, unfortunate. Game breaking? No. Does it make the game bad? No. But it does mean the game is missing a little something that the previous entries had. Finally, as we start coming around on the end here, there are some real odd things going on that the game, I don't know if it was rushed, because it does seem very polished, but there were some weird choices made. Things that don't exactly work very well. There has been a change to some of the systems that I kind of question. One of them's very minor. One of them is they now have, very similar to the Maiden from Demon's Souls, they now have the Emerald Herald, who works at Majula. She is your new person for leveling up. Basically, every time you want to spend souls, you have to go back to her, listen to her tell you, bearer of curses and blah 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 blah. Do you want to spend your souls? Yes. And this seems like a very minor thing, but in reality, it gets old very quick. The combination of you're on one of these spokes of the wheel, and you're working your way through, and you're having a grand old time, and you realize, you know what, I'm carrying kind of a lot of souls. Maybe I should go spend some of these. Well, you can't just walk back to the bonfire and spend them. No, you got to go back. You have to load over to Majula, so you got the one load screen. Then you got to talk to the Emerald Herald. She's going to chat your ear off for about 40 seconds. Then you got to spend your points. Then you got to get away from her. Then you have to take the bonfire and load back. It adds about 2 minutes unnecessarily to the whole process, which doesn't sound like much, and it really isn't. It is a minor complaint. But after you've heard the Emerald Herald tell you for the 300th time about how you are the chosen one and you got to go see the king, you're going to want to punch her in the face. And it's so just not necessary. And hopefully they will eventually patch it out where she talks in the background or something to fix that. Beyond that, the new system for weapon durability seems to be jacked up. I've been really messing around with it, and certain weapons, even if they have a higher durability than other weapons, they seem to wear down and break unbelievably fast. I went on a little bit of a rant on this in my other video. I was using the large club, which is this big two-handed mace and everything, and I'd worked pretty hard to get it, and I can literally kill less than 20 enemies, and I have to repair the thing. It's ready to break. And it has fairly high durability. Most weapons have around 50, 60, 70, and it has 70 durability, but it just goes through it so incredibly fast. I was messing around with the greatsword, and that went through a little slower than the mace, but it still went through it way too quick. I could not clear a full zone with it, taking my time without it breaking. I had to do this. And this whole system, maybe it's just a bug. Maybe they don't have their numbers calculated out. But I understand checking and monitoring my weapons, making sure that I'm keeping them in working order. but your weapon should definitely last long enough that you can go to one zone of the game and clear that zone without worrying about it breaking. Outside of these few rare exceptions, there's some really rare weapons out there that have special abilities. Okay, those, if they're going to break, I understand that. This is a wooden mace. It's a club. That should not be breaking. So this system needs to be checked. The last one that I have some real concerns about is they seem to have cheated the enemy AI a little bit in order to adjust the game's difficulty. If you play the game enough, you're going to come across this. It tends to happen mostly with the guys carrying big two-handed weapons, especially two-handed maces, where in the middle of their attack animations, they will acquire their target, which is going to normally be you, and they will adjust their swing in mid-swing, in the middle of the animation, and catch you where you shouldn't be caught, where you should have been well outside of it. And this is something that is a real problem, in my opinion, with Dark Souls 2. Now, it's not enough to break the game. It's not enough to make it unplayable, but it is definitely enough to cause a few deaths through each playthrough. It is definitely enough to make it a little frustrating, as something that Dark Souls and Demon Souls has always had going for it was you never felt like you died because the mechanics were cheating. You felt like you died because you screwed up. That has changed for me now in Dark Souls 2. I know of every playthrough I play have had at least 3 or 4 deaths where I felt like I was cheated by the mechanics. And at first I wrote it off like maybe I just need to learn the new mechanics. No, I've been playing the game for about 2 months now. And it's not that I need to learn the new mechanics. It's certain mobs can retarget you in the middle of their attack animation. And that just can be very, very frustrating. There's also some issues with the hitboxes and the hit detection of enemy weapons. This is extremely obvious if you fight the Cinder, not Cinder Demon, in the Iron Keep. The furnace guy with the chest sword. I can't think of his name right now. His sword, if you watch his sword, he will catch people regularly with his big overhead slash. And the sword itself is about 1.5 feet wide. However, if you are anywhere within the front 5 feet of him, in a conal area in front of him, it's going to hit you. You can be 3 feet away from the sword and it'll still hit you, as the hitbox is way bigger than the sword itself. It's more like he's carrying a 3-foot in diameter tree log rather than a sword. And things like that need to really be watched in Dark Souls, as that's not the way the game should behave. And if they start letting little things like that slip now, that can very quickly lead to frustration within the game and can very quickly leading to the franchise dying. For now, it's just enough to be an annoyance, but we got to keep an eye on it, as it could very quickly degrade into something worse. So, I think that for the most part covers it. Everything overall, I've given quite a bit of negative about Dark Souls 2. It is still a very good game. Just in my opinion, it doesn't quite live up to Dark Souls 1. However, if you are looking to start playing a Souls game, this one should be picked up. If you are interested, or if you are a Dark Souls player, if you played Dark Souls 1 Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2 is still very much worth the playthrough. It is very much worth the investment. It is a very solid game. Just be ready that it does not bring the improvements that Dark Souls did over Demon Souls. Dark Souls was a clear step up in quality over Demon Souls. It did almost everything, with a few minor exceptions, better. Dark Souls 2 does a few minor things better. The co-op, the new stat system's a little bit better. Some of that stuff's a little bit better, but for the most part, it does everything either on par with Dark Souls 1 or slightly less than it. At the end of the day, I give Dark Souls 2 an 8 out of 10. Whereas for me, Dark Souls 1 is about an 8.5 out of 10. So you can see a slight step down in terms of overall quality. But it is still a great game that I highly recommend everybody take a look at. I think you'll have a really good time with it. So this has been Paler. Thanks for watching.